engineering education and has helped develop concept inventories in the undergraduate nanoelectronics course, as well as basic electricity concepts. In the past, Dr. Verma worked on developing optical interconnects for silicon-based ICs. He was a process automation engineer and senior officer in a steel plant and a postdoctoral scholar at the University-affiliated Research Center at the NASA Ames Research Center. He received the Professor of the Year Award from the 2015 Electrical Engineering graduating class. He is also the author of the well-received work of literary fiction, The Lives and the Times, published in 2011 by Satyam Books. The sequel, The Lives and the Times 2, was released in March of this year. Dr. Verma's talk is entitled The Scholar and the Writer, Reflections. Dr. Verma, welcome. We're very happy to have you.
Oh, that was a very enlightening introduction. I didn't know I did so many things. But first, I would like to thank everybody for coming here for this talk. I would also like to thank Maria and Bruce for inviting me for this talk. It was a few weeks ago, if I remember correctly, about 2 weeks ago, when you reached out to me and asked me if I could make this presentation. And at that time, I really didn't know what I was getting into. It was like signing off on my mortgage papers. I mean, you don't really see the fine print and you just sign off until, of course, it hits you. And it hit me when I visited Bruce, just to confirm whether this was even a real thing or not. And he showed me this flyer which said, a scholar and a writer. And I never really thought of myself as a scholar or a writer. I mean, when you think of the word scholar, the image that you conjure up is one of somebody who shuns humanity, is in some deep, dark dungeon working on some problems of who knows what importance. And to double up, I mean, a writer is even worse. When I see myself, I really did not see myself, as I said, as a writer or a scholar. I mean, when I look at myself, I probably sometimes, if I'm in a good mood, see Keanu Reeves, dodging bullets and punches and kicks, or sometimes as the real life version of the most interesting man in the world, somebody who can, I don't know, tame a mechanical bull. So certainly, I mean, that hit me. And then what really hit me even further was when you asked if it could be videotaped, and I said, this is serious stuff. And thank you for this opportunity. So I must admit, I did have a mild panic attack when I looked at the title of what was going to be my presentation. And then I thought, this is really not about me, because after the scholar and the writer comes the word reflection. And so it has to be a reflection about something. And so I am going to spend some time reflecting on persistence, because that has really been how I would define my journey for the last 15 or 16 years. It's been about persistence. This was back in 1999, and I can really relate to what Snow said about this dichotomy between humanities and science, and let me illustrate that. So this was in 1999 when I had this vague desire that I should probably put down my thoughts, which I thought were really important at that time, into writing. And if somebody had given me a good talking over, I would have probably not done that, because it turned out to be tougher than I had thought. So I did compose a few short stories that I mainly kept to myself and bored my friends with at times, and they had to pretend to like it. If they didn't, they wouldn't get free beer and free food and whatnot. So, and at that time, I was also pursuing my master's at Vanderbilt, and it was a tough time an exciting time, because we were in the midst of doing something interesting, which was taking an Intel Pentium chip, for example, or any IC, right? Now, if you look at an IC, it's an electrical device. So the data in that IC is carried by electrical signals, which is really electrons going from one end to the other, right? Zipping past and carrying a lot of data, huge amount of data. But then somebody came up with the idea that maybe you don't need to carry that information by electrons. You can carry that information by light, which would be even faster because it would be traveling at the speed of light. And so there was this big research at that time going on into trying to move from electrons to light within a single IC, and I was part of that. So Vanderbilt at that time did not really have a good fabrication lab where you could actually design the system and test it out. So the closest fabrication lab was at North Carolina State University. So I would pick up the car, drive 550 miles, reach there, and get the fabrication work done. I would be there at the lab at 8 o'clock in the morning. And this really irritated the lab supervisor, because it turned out that she wanted this to be a secret just to herself, that she does not open the lab at 8 o'clock. She opens it at some later time, whenever she wakes up. So it was not just me, but it was not just her, but I too, who knew that she never opened the lab at 8 o'clock. And that really did not go down well with her, but she tolerated my presence. And so I would use the lab, fabricate my devices, come back, go to the lab directly after 550 miles, and do some experiments, and then gather results, and so on and so forth. So it was an exciting time. But at the same time, as I said, I really did start looking at writing as a hobby more than anything else, and even more than a hobby, as a means to impress people around me, I think. Then sometime in 2000, I looked at all the stories that I had written. And at that time, I was also writing my master's thesis. And then I said to myself, if I can write a master's thesis, I can probably also write a novel. And I couldn't be so far from the truth, because I started writing a novel. I had this idea. And the idea really came from an interesting observation, which was, and it wouldn't have happened anywhere except probably in the United States of America, and probably nowhere as dynamic as Vanderbilt at that time, Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, where you had the country music going on, and then you had a big international population, people from all over the world coming together. So it was pretty exciting. My neighbors were in the apartment that I lived were an Irish couple who were trying to make their mark in country music. I mean, you wouldn't imagine. And when I talked to them, I made a huge mistake, because they spoke with that accent, and I said, I love your British accent. And their expression went from a smile to a big frown, and I hate you, and whereas, can I kill you? But it went well. So as I said, the place was very dynamic. So I did get a chance to interact with a whole bunch of people from across the world. And I started to realize that people were not very different. I mean, yes, they did have different experiences, but in terms of their basic nature, they were not really very different. They all wanted the same thing. And then on top of that, I realized another thing. I mean, when I talk to people for example, from Brazil, or from Argentina, or from Mexico, or from Russia, from Japan, from Pakistan, from a whole bunch of places, I realized that at a bigger level, at a societal level, the societies were undergoing similar transformations, similar struggles. So I thought maybe I should try to capture that in my work, and that's how I started. I started writing, and it took me about a few short months to churn out my first page, and a few more painful months to churn out my next page, and then things happened faster. So I started churning out pages after pages of things that I absolutely hated, but I still kept on churning out pages until sometime in was it about 2005 or 2006 that I was hit by what is called as a writer's block. It was also in 2001, 2002 that I moved from Vanderbilt to Georgia Tech. So and started on my PhD. And during that time, my advisor also passed away because of cancer, and so there was a lot of churning going on at that time. In that uncertainty, I also realized that this was in 2006, I remember that, I realized that the topic that I had picked up was very, very tough. And I really did not, probably, I was being honest to myself at that time. I did not have the maturity to handle that. How do I write something that is so broad, right, captures so many things, and applies to any middle class in any emerging society? That was just proving to be very tough. I did finally complete my PhD in 2005, end of 2005. I moved around a bit for a few months and then came here in 2006. So things were also in a state of flux. In 2010 is when something interesting happened that actually helped me get rid of the writer's block, and that was a recommendation of a novel by a friend of mine, and that novel ended up winning a big award. And so once, I remember this was in the San Antonio airport, I was flying somewhere, I bought that book and I started reading it, and I absolutely hated it. Really, really hated it from the bottom of my heart. It was probably the worst book I have ever read. And it ended up winning the Booker Award. And I said to myself, this is really bizarre. I mean, if some really horrible book can win a big award, the least I can do is really finish off my book. So as soon as I got off the plane, I called up a few friends and I said, let's go to Las Vegas, and this is going to be a turning moment in my life. I am going to celebrate this by going to Las Vegas and doing a few unmentionable and some mentionable things. So we ended up in a trip to Las Vegas, which was not highly approved by my family members. But, I came back. At that point, as I said, nothing motivates you than some really bad, somebody winning a recognition for what you think they don't deserve. So that really motivated me. So in the next few months, what had taken 7 or 8 years, in the next few months, I finished it off. I finished off my first novel, and then I made the next big blunder of my life. I did not follow what my PhD advisor had told me. And he had told me, no matter what you do, if you're sending out anything, whether it's scientific or general or whatever it is, if you're sending it out to another person, make sure that you revise it. So I did not revise my work. I thought, because I had completed my novel, the world is going to be on my feet, and they're going to accept whatever I send. Coming back to it, I have destroyed all the old drafts so that they are erased from public memory, nowhere to be seen, because they were horrible. Really, really horrible. But I still sent them out. I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know any better. I never knew any idea about the publishing industry and how crazy it is. I got rejected probably maybe 500 times. I mean, I stopped counting after 200. You know, there's some point in time when, in fact, it was so bad. That I sent. If you go to the website of any book agents, literary agents, they're going to try to pretend that they're super busy and they're receiving, 500 submissions a week or a day or something, and they don't have time to read anything. And so I sent my work to one agent, and she rejected it. And then 1 year later, and I'll tell you what happened during that 1 year time, I sent it again to that agent, and she replied back with a copy of the email that she had sent a year earlier to me, saying, you know what, just buzz off and come back with something else in so many words. So what happened during that 1 year time was something, was a stroke of the first luck towards publishing this work, which was that I sent it to a publisher, and the publisher basically said, the idea is very good, and it is really commendable that you're working on it and you've done something on it, but I would advise you to take up a course in MFA, the Master of Fine Arts. And that got me thinking, maybe there is something in my work maybe there's some problem. And that is when I actually, with an open mind, read my own work, right? And I realized that it is full of mistakes. Simple grammatical mistakes, but really glaring ones that shouldn't be there. So I said, let me take some professional help. So I got in touch with a student here at TAMUK, and she graduated in 2012. Ashley, by the name of Ashley Rixby, and so we started working on the work, and she helped me. She was in her final years of her English degree here. So we started going through it and correcting, all the glaring grammatical errors, things that I purposely had left out, making sure everything is perfect, polished, right? And so that is when this work really was finally born. Now, because I had been rejected so many times, because I had failed in one important aspect, which is to make sure that you revise your work. But then the one thing that I really had going for me at that time was, of course, my focus on being persistent. That is the case. It is so easy to give up. I could have given up at the first 100, after the 100 rejection. I could have given up after 200 rejections. I could have given up after 300 rejections. But I kept up at it. And then in 2010, I did what no self-respecting man would do, which is I actually talked to my mother. Because my mother at that time was getting a technical book published in law. So she was in touch with this publisher. It wasn't a well-known publisher because she had bad experiences with well-known publishers. So she was talking to this small publisher, but still well-known in the law field. So I asked her if she could help, and she said, "Yeah, well, you know what? Let me talk to my publisher because they have their own networks, maybe, and so the publisher could help." So she sent my manuscript to the publisher, and the publisher said, "Let me send it out to a few people I know," and which he did. In the meanwhile, I don't know why, he ended up reading my work. And he said, "You know what? This is I like it, and because I like it, let me take a chance and let me churn out my first trade book." And I said, "Fine," and that was how uneventful the first book really was. It was that's how it came out in 2011. Was this publisher who was basically a law book publisher trying to move to trade books and just happened to like my book because, I don't know, maybe they had a lot of time on their hands. But I'm thankful for that. As I said, the whole period during the time was really marked by my focus on persistence. That is desires. It is important to realize that the difference between desire and passion is success. Every desire is a passion if it meets with some kind of a success. Otherwise, it's just a desire. And to get to that point, there is a need for hard work. There is a need for persistence and not giving up. Yes, you can be creative in your approach, right? You can be creative. You can move the goalpost around. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to move the goalpost around. But as long as you are persistent, as long as you're in the game, that is the important thing. It is a marathon. It is not a short for no one. If you want to win the lottery, you still have to take the effort of going and buying a lottery ticket. So you have to make that effort, which I did, and which I continue to do in my scientific field too. Scientific field is not in that sense much different. People are as people struggle the same way. I remember so many of my grant proposals being rejected, my papers being rejected. But the whole point is to be persistent, and eventually hard work does pay off. Now, when it comes to combining both the scientific and the humanities aspect, that is something that I also struggle with. That was also another reason for facing the writer's block that I faced for many years. Science, by its very nature, demands a certain logical bent of mind. I mean, you have to sit down, solve a few equations, work in the lab. It is not easy. On the other hand, a creative work like this, like these two, do require that you let go your logical bent of mind and focus more on the creative aspect. And that dichotomy is not easy to grapple with. The only way I could do that was to divide up my time, number one, and then number two, to really force myself to again be persistent and consistent. So I forced myself to churn out 1 page a day or 1 page in 2 days, 2 or 3 pages a week, but I kept on going back, right? And I kept on going back to my work, but never kept going back in my work. So one thing that I did not do when I was writing these books was to go back and revise until I had reached the end. Because once you start doing that, it does take up some time, and then you start hating it. That is true. You start hating your work. There were so many times when I absolutely, totally hated my work. I wanted to delete all the pages. I did not like what I read. And so that also forced me to not go back to reading what I was writing. And I decided that I would read it only after I came to the end. Now that helped in writing my second book, because when it came to the second book, I did not carry that much baggage. I knew what I was going to write. The platform was already created because this was a sequel. The good thing about a sequel, of course, is that you have already created a platform, so you don't need to you need to create some new characters, but you don't really need to create a whole bunch of them. So it made it easier. And it also, I had more experience in writing and the demands that it would take. On an average, I found out that it took me about 2 hours to write one single page. So I started writing the second book in 2011. is 2011 is when I started writing the second book. And in 2014, I remember I took the summer off, and I said, I'm going to finish this. And that's what I did. I would go to the library every day, sit down from 9 o'clock in the morning till 4 or 5, just typing on my laptop. And as the summer came to an end is when this story also did come to an end. So that persistence helped enormously. And as I said, the persistence has also helped in my scientific pursuits, the so-called scholarly pursuits. The reason I mentioned about that the device that I would fabricate at the North Carolina State University, because that idea never really left my mind. I over the years, I had it in my mind that I would continue to work on this. I would take it to the next logical step, which is what happened in 2009. Is when I got together with two other people, one from Georgia Tech Research Institute and another faculty from UT, which was UT Brownsville, and we decided to look at that problem in a fresh light. And that is when we decided, we worked out some steps, and we came up with an entirely new class of antennas that has opened up an entirely new scientific field that can potentially affect biology, medical imaging, very high frequency antenna applications, and so on and so forth. So that also really paid off. What also paid off is, of course, is not focusing on rejections. Rejections are important. They are absolutely important. You need to pay attention to what people are saying. It is when I was getting rejected, as I was trying to get my book published, when one publisher basically mentioned that I need to take a course I need to pursue an MFA, the Master of Fine Arts, is when I realized that there was something wrong. I could have rejected that advice too. And that advice was certainly unsolicited. I mean, it was out of sheer goodwill that publisher mentioned it. And if I had not paid attention to that, it would have, I would not have been, this book would not have met the success it did. So rejections are important if they are constructive. If they are not constructive, if they're form rejections, which many people who apply for jobs really do get form rejections, yes, they are not constructive, but then they are still part of life, and they should not stop you from pursuing what you are trying to pursue. The whole point is about being persistent. At the end of the day, success is really about persistence and nothing else. Thank you. Any questions? I guess we are all hungry for our, I can see that being opened.
You said that it could only happen in the United States. What is it because of dynamism in the United States? Or?
Well, it is. Yes, that's a good question. The focus on being multicultural and welcoming is something that is, I think, very unique to the United States. You don't really see that anywhere. Maybe to a certain extent it might be replicated in a place like Canada, but the United States is certainly a big melting pot, and that really does bring a lot of people and together. There is a huge exchange of, there's a big platform where exchange of ideas, big ideas, takes place. And it does have a big impact on scientific efforts. It does have a big impact. There's a reason why the United States is the world leader in science and engineering and research. There is a big reason why the United States is viewed as a global cultural magnet and an influencer, because this is the place where ideas get churned out, trashed, accepted, propagated, and accepted. Thank you.
Question?
Yes.
Were you ever surprised at some of the characters that you came up with? Were you completely surprised that you would gravitate towards certain characters, and surprised at what you wrote down in your books? Did they take on their own life?
That's a good question. Yes, they did. They did. And so when I started writing both the books, actually, that's one thing common with both the books. I had the beginning in mind, and I had the end in mind, and the middle was a big blank slate. Yes, there are writers who would like to have everything written down before they start writing. They would want, each chapter to meant to talk about specific things, each character to play a specific role. I purposely did not do that. I shunned being that systematic and that organized. As I said, I had the beginning in mind, I had the end in mind. I let the middle play out by itself. And so many characters surprised me. Yes, they did. They scared me, they surprised me, and they entertained me. Yes, yes. And there are characters in both these works that have thoroughly entertained me. And I don't think I am. Yes, they were born out of my imagination, but I'm hoping that they don't reflect my personality in any way, shape, or form. But yes, they did surprise me. Yes.
How did you come up with the name of June?
Oh, that's another interesting question. I actually did not have a good name for the main character. And so, as I mentioned in the first book, and I alluded to that, I was born in the month of June. And as I mentioned, you know what? Let me read that part down. Yeah. So it says, the name June is clearly not very common. However, in no way should it be construed as a statement against societal norms as they apply to assigning a proper noun to the newly born. As it turns out, the name's connection to the Gregorian calendar is not entirely coincidental. Right after his birth, the entire gamut of relatives offered diverse and diverging opinions on what the boy's name should be. In order to satisfy everybody's ego, his father decided upon June, his birth month. The idea was to change it later at an opportune time when emotions had sufficiently cooled. That, in so many words, is really my way of saying I had no good name for my main character, really. And I decided I'm going to change it at some point of time, but never really got around to doing it. Yes. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I have these two copies, and I'm going to give one to one and one to the other, and I'll sign it. Not to the same person, because I'm still trying to sell my book, so I'm going to make you buy at least one, and I'll be happy to sign it.
The first one's on Kindle, I believe. It's available as an ebook.
Yes. The first one is both, paperback and Kindle. The second is in paperback, but the Kindle should be coming out sometime in summer or in fall. Yes.
Both are available in the library.
Both are available in the library. Yes. Thank you so much.